Coming up next, the story of one of the strangest, most compelling songs in the history of the 20th century, with an equally peculiar music video that took everything that we knew about rock music and set it on fire, really, creating an artistic reign that few bands came close to. Up next, the co-writer of this 80s masterpiece breaks down both the song and the video, what it means all these years later on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you would take a second right now and subscribe below, we're on our way to 500,000, 500,000, all due to you, and that'll get us there quicker. Be part of an exclusive channel, interviews, stories of the rock and roll era, and also we have a Patreon that you can check out. We just put up some new content just a couple days ago. Talking Heads are truly one of the most brilliant and creative bands in music history. They were one of those groups that you never knew what to expect, from one album to another. They're truly one of a kind. David Byrne on lead vocals, guitar, Tina Weymouth on bass, Chris Franz on drums, and Jerry Harrison on guitar and keyboards. This band simply helped pioneer new wave music. They integrated aspects of art rock and punk and funk and world music with avant-garde sensibilities. But to me, the crown jewel of all the jewels that they created is the ultra-compelling classic Once in a Lifetime. From their fourth studio album, Remain in Light, the song was released in early 1981 through Sour Records. I was extremely fortunate to discuss this song at length with producer, co-writer, and multi-instrumentalist Jerry Harrison in a recent Zoom session, and he's a fascinating guy. We talked about the development of the track in the studio, its meaning, its iconic music video. Like the music of Talking Heads, the history of this song is deeply fascinating, to say the least. Now, as we go into this interview, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenny Eyewear, that helps to make this channel possible. If you want to level up in your personal style, you just got to go to Zenny.com. You can choose from scores of shapes, colors, and sizes and customize your frames any way you like for less than what you would pay for a vinyl record. It's true. Check it out at Zenny.com. Here's Jerry Harrison with the story of Once in a Lifetime. One of the many facets of the brilliance of Talking Heads is that every album is just distinctly different, and each of you brought an invaluable dimension to the peerless art of that band. Let's talk about Once in a Lifetime. The music recorded on the 1980 LP, Remain in Light, for example, significantly different from any other Talking Heads record to that point. Rather than imitate African music, you and your bandmates had the ambition of fusing rock and African genres to create something fresh and innovative. Tell me about that.
Well, I think that the kicking off point, or the starting point of Remain in Light, and of course, Once in a Lifetime as part of that record, was Zimbra on Fear of Music. We had all gotten fascinated by African music, particularly Fela Ransom Kuti. But also Manu Dibango, and then King Sunny Ade. Particularly Fela really hit me. And when we recorded Zimbra, it almost didn't make it to the record because we had no lyrics. And we were really basically putting the record order together, about to leave for a tour that went around the world. And I said, can we listen to that track that we didn't quite finish? And everyone goes, we have to finish this. So David and I flew back on a 30-hour flight from Perth. Instead of going on a 2-week vacation in Europe, we flew back and finished the song and mastered it, and then flew out to do Pink Pop in Denmark. But I think we all knew that we wanted to continue that exploration for our next record. So when we convened in the Bahamas at Compass Point, where we had made more songs about buildings and food, there was also a little bit of, there's something special about when you first create a song, you play it maybe with a slightly more tentative feeling, but there's a feel that it has the first couple of times you play it that maybe it gets more bombastic or more dramatic. You learn things from, of course, playing in front of people, and most of the time that makes it better. But we also wanted to capture that innocence that happens when you first do it. So we sort of deliberately did not have songs pre-written. There were maybe riffs and ideas, but it was really on the fly. And also very much going in and recording one, maybe two tracks at the most at the same time. We began with Rhett Davies, who had been the engineer on Remain in Light, and Brian Eno, who had done Fear of Music and more songs about buildings and food. I think he was thinking that maybe he didn't want to get stuck in that he was doing all these Talking Heads records. But then when he heard about what we were doing, he flew down. And then Rhett decided that he couldn't understand what we were doing, and he left. And then we went through a little bit of a period of trying to use the second engineer, Benji at Compass Point, and Brian, but it was really moving way too slowly. And then Dave Jordan joined us, who David and Brian had worked with on My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. So Once in a Lifetime is a very unusual song because one of the ways we were working is mixing boards at that time had ways to link faders so that they were part of a group A or group B. And so we would record all of these tracks and then place them into group A or B with literally a mechanical fader that was that set the level. And so the songs were very much going back and forth between A and B, B, and, sometimes with a little bit of moves in the faders. But that was how we used the studio as a process to create what might sometimes would be called the verse and the chorus, but let's say the two parts of the songs. And Once in a Lifetime, if you push certain tracks up, you would feel that the beat was a half beat later than if you pushed other faders up. So it has a tension in it between the what's the downbeat. And in fact, you'll hear that if you listen carefully to the bass part versus the drums and what is now obviously the timing of the song.
How do I work this? And you may ask yourself, where is the...
People very often misplay it by going dun 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 on the beat, dun dun dun, and it's like dun 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 on the upbeat, dun 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 dun, and it's dun dun dun, and it's that there's this kind of tension there. And of course, then the sort of brilliant beginning, I went out and I was playing this arpeggiated part that I remember playing on a piano, which then Brian sent through a lot of delays, and he had some other processing equipment that he'd brought with him. And this wash came out that, we did a good job in Stop Making Sense in our live tours doing it with a Prophet 5, but there was all with an echo on it, but there's always something. People are always asking me, how did you get that sound? I keep trying to program that sound and I can't get it. David then probably came up with some of the most memorable lyrics that are on that record for that song. I mean, it's one of the reasons it was used in multiple soundtracks. Down and Out in Beverly Hills being one that actually sort of catapulted it back into public attention and helped it make it one of the most, we'll say, requested songs the Talking Heads ever made.
Well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by.
Well, kind of vocally imitating an evangelist a little bit. His performance
right.
on that evokes a religious sermon.
Yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife.
And it really kind of pushed against this idea that baby boomers had of getting a mortgage and family, just everything in a box kind of thing is how I always took it. And I love that.
Yeah, and also, that and pushing against maybe the map that sort of your parents have laid out for you, which is based upon whatever worked for them, or their aspirations of what they wish they could have done, and they're hoping that you could fulfill. And then going, wait a moment, how did I get here?
How did I get here?
Like, I don't even like law school, or you know, I don't really want to be dissecting things that disgust me, or it makes me nervous, or I feel weird, and maybe a doctor is not the way I want to go, or whatever it is.
And you may tell yourself, this is not my beautiful wife.
So it certainly speaks to finding your own path.
For sure.
And having the bravery to trust your intuition to go down various paths.
Musically, the song was shaped by an arrangement of recorded jam sessions by the band. Tell us a little bit about the arrangement. I'm really interested in that.
Well, there's a version of the song on the Greatest Hits album, I believe, or an extended release of Remain in Light that was on the 5-1 mixes that E.T. Thorngren and I did of all of the albums, but it's called Right Start. And you can hear how the song sounded at one point. One of the things that happened is this I actually think was a mistake, is we were on all of this. We had all this momentum in the Bahamas, and every day we were creating really, really well. I mean, it was amusing because AC/DC was doing Back in Black in the next room. And Brian Johnson, it was his first album, so of course he was nervous. Mutt Lange is an amazing singer and arrangement of vocalists. And he'd get these compression headings, and you'd see him go, I only got yell! And then it was like, oh my God, my head's hurt. And so the singing on that record apparently is quite patched and edited together. And he goes, it doesn't happen to me live. And we'd be hanging out at the pool table with them, and Chris had gotten some snorkeling gear, and I had, one day I was like annoyed at someone in the studio, and Chris goes, let's go snorkeling. And it was like, I don't want to go, and I go, and then and I put my face in the water. It's like, oh my Lord, look how wonderful this is. It was like all of that went away in a second. And so we asked the members of AC/DC, had they been in the water? They go, we don't go in the water, sharks, we're from Australia. And I think they did one guitar solo and one vocal, and we did all of the basic tracks to Remain in Light in 3 weeks.
Just thinking of Talking Heads and AC/DC hanging out, I can't imagine anything cooler.
Yeah. But anyway, Brian had a prior commitment, and we took 3 weeks off, and we went back, and I negotiated with lots of studios in New York and got this rate, knowing that we might, with all of these tracks, probably need to have 2 machines sunk together where you get a lot of extra charges for that. And we went back to Sigma Sound. I'd made a single, and I'd gone down and helped Busta Jones make a solo album down at Sigma Sound in Philadelphia. And I had made a single with Dona Hendrix, which was the first time I was a producer. And I loved the professionalism of what they had there. And so Sigma had its branch in New York City, and so they were on a part of the top of the list. And I mean, I was really going back and forth between Electric Lady and Sigma and RPM. And Sigma won. And I think I convinced them that could be a lost leader, that we would bring in other rock bands because their bread and butter was R&B and disco. But we got there, and then the challenges of writing the lyrics for Remain in Light is there aren't that many chord changes. And so there's nothing that's leading you away from the sort of pedal tone that usually goes through an entire song, and the sort of the mode that the song is in.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was.
One of the ways that David got over his writer's cramp was to pick up instruments and start playing other parts. So the songs began to morph. We usually had these tracks where we had rehearsed in a loft and really had a whole, much more of a map of where we were going than we did on Remain in Light. Remain in Light is actually, we very deliberately sort of wrote it in the studio, and wrote it either doing things and then going out and playing as a group once we figured out something. But sometimes Chris would go and put down a beat, and someone would play a bass part, and I'd come up I have this idea, and it would just sort of composition through accretion, and it had a very different feel. I also would say, go back to the first point you made, is we were highly influenced by trying to capture the feel of what we'd heard in this African music, but we basically played almost all the music ourselves. And so it went through our past, our ability to play like that, but also we, unlike, say, an album like Graceland, where it's sort of Paul Simon's voice put on top of an African music group that are familiar with each other and playing in that mode.
Diamonds on the soles of his shoes.
We got a little closer to that when we were in making Naked, but we were always still playing some of the most basic parts ourselves and then adding them as flavors rather than depending that they created the sort of backbone and we were adding ours on top. And so I think that, it makes it a unique sounding record because it makes it's our version of that. I mean, other things like that is, I would say Little Creatures and True Stories is, David is more responsible for all the songwriting on those albums, but they're our version of Americana. They don't have anything of like, it looks like you copied Jolene on this, or you copied
right.
All Right Now on this, or you copied, they are straightforward and limited instrumentation and very, very, almost the opposite of what both Speaking in Tongues and Remain in Light were, which was sort of expanded grooves that could definitely, could go on forever, so to speak.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was.
There were also people that had moved to the Bahamas who were English tax exiles. We became really good friends with Robert Palmer. I've told this story before, but it's so great, I want to tell it again. And so when we were making more songs about buildings and food, I was sitting in New York, and we were supposed to start, say, on Friday of a week. And it could have been a Monday, but whatever it was, I knew that we had this house that we had rented, and we had rented it for the month or something. So it's, wait a moment, we have a house in the Bahamas and it's freezing here. So I just said, I'm going to go ahead of time. And I hopped on a plane, flew to the Bahamas, and I got there at 8 p.m. and it's dark. Go to a taxi driver, go, well, could you take me to Compass Point? Because I figured there'd be someone at like the studios in New York. They stayed open all night. And he goes, what's Compass Point? And I go, it's a recording studio. And he goes, oh, yes, I think I've heard. I think that's Gambia Village. Okay, get in, but I have to drop this other person off. And it was on the exact opposite end of Nassau. So we went and dropped him off, and we get to a place, and there's a boat ramp, and you can see the waves, the ocean crashing, and a single street lamp, chickens clucking. He goes, here it is, get out. And I get out, and I go like, all the buildings are dark. And it's basically this kind of very basic Bahamian village with a few sort of cement block stucco buildings. And a door opens and Robert Palmer says, you must be in dire need of a cocktail. Why don't you come in? And he was such a gracious host. It was one of the most like, oh my God, thank God. I ended up sleeping at the studio that night and then got to the house the next day. But so he was hanging around, and I think he did some percussion parts some of which on Remain in Light, which I think that's some we used and some we replaced when we got back to New York with some more professional percussion players. But, he had been exploring New Orleans music with, what's this, Chasing Sally in the Alley or something. I can't remember exactly what that he worked with Leo Nachicelli on and things like that. So he had the same excitement about exploring music of other cultures and then bringing it into his songwriting process.
Well, once in a lifetime, the video talking about David as an evangelist, it was rumored that he was portrayed after in that music video, evangelist Ernest Angley.
Way to number them. God said the stars were the souls that
I think that is true, but I'm not going to speak for David. I do know that David would use things like that as inspiration for both personas that he could adopt, as well as sort of structure of how people use language that is certainly outside of the world of New York, we'll say, using a repetitive or just that, obviously we wouldn't be calling an album Speaking in Tongues if he wasn't, somewhat studying that whole lifestyle or belief system or whatever obviously it's the born again version of Christianity where you feel that you need to have this recommitment to Christ and to maybe being baptized again and have it as ecstatic experience. And so I think he did study. I just don't know if he studied one or whether he studied five, and that's just one of the main ones. He made that video with the choreographer Tony Basil was very involved in that video. She had done a video for Cross-Eyed and Painless using the Lockers, the dance group that would perform on Saturday Night Live that she worked with. Tony was great. She's also in the world of rock and roll. She's mainly known for "Hey Mickey, You're So Fine." Featured in Wayne's World, but she was a very creative woman and a good friend in LA of all of us. But David, I think, made the first connection to her, but she was influential on that video.
Speaking of, you talk about recommitment and baptism, things like that. Water is a flowing theme throughout the track, lyrically and instrumentally.
Well, I also think, the wash that we were describing that begins the song also has the gurgling brook quality to it. I think that there's sort of a connection between the sound of the music and that imagery of water flowing.
Well, and the synthesizer riff that you crafted that gives Once in a Lifetime bubbling under effect throughout the song, that's very interesting.
Well, as I was saying, I think that was a piano that I actually played going through a lot of effects that Brian did. But we had to really trust Brian because that was back in the days of analog tapes. So, space on the tracks was a premium, especially when you're doing everything one at a time, so that what would be recorded is what you played plus what he added to it. And we had to, fortunately, we were in a position that we felt like we were in such a sympathetic way that we were all working for the same purpose and together, and that was fine. But I do know that Dave Jordan, and I was on his side on this, that we had an argument with Brian that we wanted to record at 30 IPS, which gives you more brilliant high end. There's some advantages to 15 IPS for the sort of fullness of the low end, which has to do with the bias curve of the tape. But he wanted to use 15 IPS because he was frustrated by how much time it took to rewind the tape. And Dave goes, "Look, Brian, I'm not going to do this, and don't tell me this is a guide. You never come back to record something a second time. So I quit unless I have the time to get a sound that I'm proud of." And so he stood up, and that's what we did.
Well, during the vamp out of Once in a Lifetime, you created a really cool climax. It was fashioned, as I understand it, from the outro Velvet Underground track, What's
Going On. Yeah. Yeah, that I was a big fan, of course, with the Modern Lovers. The Velvet Underground were very influential to us. Influential to the entire scene that came up in New York City following their heyday. But yes, I love the way that sort of distorted organ takes over, and we use that. Yeah.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it.
Well, Once in a Lifetime, I mean, it's just one of the most enduring new wave tracks ever. What is it that stands out to you all these years later?
Because it is this modal and with the wash and everything like that, it's just this sonic scape that you are put into. You're immediately in it. And then it punctuated by these statements by David. You might find yourself.
And you may find yourself
A shotgun shack, you know.
living in a shotgun shack. And you may find yourself.
So it's these demonstrative statements while you're in this just, you might say, flowing downstream, and there's a boulder and there's another, or an arrow came across, or whatever it is that's like, oh, you know, but they are just keep going and keep going to whatever's going to happen. The lyrics of it became a wonderful metaphor for down and out in Beverly Hills, of this guy who's suddenly living with this rich family and becoming a sage to the family, you know, trying to solve their life problem. And everyone in the family is asking for his advice, and he's going, it's great, but how did I get here, you know?
When a dirty bum meets the filthy rich.
It's kind of the go-to song if you're trying to create that moment of midlife crisis, confusion of where you're at in the world in your 40s or 50s, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about this. It's a legendary band. Brilliant. What is your favorite Talking Heads composition or album? What do you think about this song? What do you think it means? If you dig our content, we do invite you to subscribe below to be a part of our community of music celebration. To get Jerry Harrison's solo records or Talking Heads albums or any of their music, click below. We put some links there. Make sure to hit zenny.com for glasses and check us out on Patreon. I think you'll like what you see there. Help us keep the music alive. That's the idea. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.